Something called my name from the tree line, but I was the only one up there. I froze with my boot half raised. The crunch of leaves caught in my throat. I had been alone all day, hiking deeper into the Appalachian Mountains than I'd meant to, chasing the kind of silence you only get when you're 100 miles from the nearest highway. Silence so heavy it feels alive, but silence doesn't call your name. The voice had been close, too close, low and steady, the way a friend might say your name if they didn't want to startle you. And for half a heartbeat, my brain tried to stitch something rational together. Maybe I'd run into another hiker, someone who knew me, someone who... No, that didn't make sense. Nobody I knew would be standing in that tree line. I turned slowly, eyes narrowing into the shadows where the last of the daylight clung to the branches. The forest looked empty, but if you've ever been up there, you know that empty is just a trick the mountains play. Things crouch between the trees. Things watch, and then softer this time, it said my name again. I don't think I breathed for a full minute. I wanted to call out, to demand who was there, but every instinct in me screamed that answering would be a mistake. I'm not talking about nerves or paranoia. I mean the kind of bone-deep certainty that comes from something older than fear. You'll hear things in these mountains. Things that sound almost human, almost. The air shifted. Not wind exactly, but the sensation of something pressing against the stillness. My skin prickled, my stomach lurched. I backed away until my shoulder brushed the cold fabric of my tent. That thin nylon felt like the only wall between me and whatever stood out there. I wish I could tell you. I packed up and left right then. That I had the sense to hike back to civilization with my tail tucked and my pride broken. But pride is a dangerous thing in the Appalachians. It whispers louder than fear. It's just an echo. It's just your nerves. Don't embarrass yourself by running. So I stayed. And that night, while I tried to sleep, I heard footsteps circling my camp. Not heavy boots, not the shuffle of a bear, just pacing, deliberate, patient, and every so often, the sound of my name sliding between the trees. When dawn finally cracked open the sky, I stumbled out expecting to find tracks, broken branches, something. But the ground was untouched, dew unbroken, as if nothing had been there at all, except something had. I need you to understand. This wasn't the first time the mountains whispered to me, and it wasn't the last. If you spend enough nights up there, if you go deep enough into places people don't name, you'll learn what I did. The Appalachians aren't just hills and trees. They're a threshold, a place where something waits. I'm not telling you this for shock value. I'm telling you because people like to treat the mountains like a playground, a backdrop for Instagram shots and camping trips. They forget that whole towns have vanished up there. They forget how many bodies go missing and never come back. And they don't believe the stories until they hear the voice themselves. So let this be your warning. The mountains don't care if you believe in monsters or not. They don't care if you've hiked a dozen trails or if you've memorized every survival guide. When the sun goes down, when the forest closes in, the rules aren't yours anymore. I learned that the hard way. And if you stay with me, I'll tell you exactly what I mean. Because the night something called my name from the tree line, that was only the beginning. That wasn't the first time. And it wasn't the last. People think the strangest part of the Appalachians is the terrain, the endless ridges, the fog that clings like wet wool, the way the trees seem to twist into each other, until you can't tell where one ends and another begins. But that's not what gets you. It's the people. I don't mean that in a cruel way. I've met folks up there who would hand you a plate of cornbread before they even ask your name. But ask those same people about the woods after dark, and their faces change. The jokes stop, the smiles go brittle, and they'll tell you things with that look in their eye. The look of someone who knows you won't believe them, but hopes maybe you'll be smart enough to listen anyway. I remember sitting on the tailgate of an old Chevy outside a bait shop. A hunter, gray-bearded and stone-eyed, leaned close and said, "Don't whistle at night. Not unless you want something whistling back." He chuckled after, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that makes you feel at ease. It was the kind that covers a scar. Another time, a woman who ran a roadside diner leaned over my booth after topping off my coffee. She asked where I was headed. When I said I was camping, her hand froze on the pot. "Stay near the road," she muttered. "You go too deep, you won't come back the same." These warnings pile up like stacked stones. Some say don't look into the tree line after dusk. Others swear you shouldn't answer if you hear your own name. A few will tell you never to follow the sound of crying, no matter how much it sounds like a child in trouble. Of course, when you're young or stubborn, you think it's all superstition. I did. I told myself they were just folk tales, the same way old sailors once told stories about sea serpents. A way to explain what can't be explained. A way to scare outsiders into keeping their distance. But there's something in the way they tell it. The silence that follows. The eyes darting to the window or the tree line as if something might be listening. That's what sticks with you. That's what gnaws at the back of your mind when the sun dips low and the shadows start to stretch like spilled ink. You might laugh it off in the daylight, when the air is warm and the trails are full of hikers. But the moment you're alone, with only the wind in the branches and the smell of wet earth pressing in on you, you'll remember every word, and maybe, if you're unlucky, you'll learn. Like I did, that warnings aren't just campfire stories. They're survival guides. Let me tell you about the first time I broke one of those rules. It started like any other hike. Too much gear, not enough planning, and the kind of cocky confidence that only comes when you think you know more than the mountains. I wasn't alone this time. My buddy Tyler had come along. He'd never been out here before, and he carried himself like the woods were just a bigger version of the park trails back home. We set out late in the afternoon, chasing that gold-washed sunlight dripping between the pines. The trail was supposed to be a loop, 5 miles in and 5 back, easy enough to knock out before dark. But the Appalachians have a way of bending paths. What looks simple on paper becomes endless ridges and switchbacks. And before long, we realized we weren't heading back toward the car. We were heading deeper. By the time we set up camp, night had bled across the ridge. I remember how quiet it was. No hum of traffic, no buzz of phone signals. Just crickets, the occasional rustle of wind, and the creak of old trees shifting in the dark. Tyler joked about it. "Man, it's so quiet, you'd think we're the last people on Earth." I forced a laugh. The truth was that silence had weight. It pressed down on you until even breathing felt too loud. It was around midnight when I first heard it. A sharp, clear whistle cutting through the trees. 3 notes, low and steady. Tyler sat up, blinking in the firelight. "You hear that?" I nodded, straining my ears. The sound came again, closer this time. A tune, almost playful. We looked at each other. There wasn't supposed to be anyone else up there. We hadn't seen another hiker all day. Probably some kid messing around. Tyler whispered, though his voice lacked conviction. The whistle answered him, lilting, teasing, echoing between the pines. We tried to ignore it, stoking the fire higher, drowning the noise in nervous conversation. But the whistling grew bolder, It circled the camp, sometimes distant, sometimes so close I swore I felt the air shift as it passed. At one point, Tyler shouted into the dark, "Hey, knock it off!" Silence. For a moment I thought it was over. Then from just beyond the tree line, the whistle mimicked his exact 3-note pattern, mocking, precise. Tyler's face drained of color. "That's not funny," he muttered. We barely slept. Every time my eyes fluttered shut, another whistle cut through the night. Sometimes high-pitched, sometimes low, but always deliberate. Always waiting for us to react. Around dawn, exhaustion finally pulled me under. When I woke, the fire was ash and Tyler was gone. Panic surged through me. I called his name, my voice cracking in the cold morning air. No answer. I tore through the campsite, scanning the tree line, heart hammering. Then just as suddenly, he stumbled back into camp. His clothes were damp with morning dew, his eyes glassy and unfocused. "Where the hell were you?" I demanded. He blinked at me, confused. "What are you talking about?" "I just went to take a leak. An hour ago." He frowned, shaking his head. I don't think so." I pressed him, but he shut down, lips tight, gaze fixed on the ground. When I asked if he'd heard the whistling, his jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. Finally, he muttered, "Don't ask me about it again." We packed up in silence. The trail seemed shorter on the way back, as if the mountains had spit us out once they were done playing. Tyler never went camping again. He won't even talk about that trip, no matter how many times I bring it up. And the truth is, sometimes I wonder if the man who walked back into camp that morning was the same friend I'd started the hike with, because the mountains don't just whisper. Sometimes they take. Sometimes they give something back that looks the same but isn't. And that was the moment I realized some warnings are more than superstition. If the whistling in the pines left me unsettled, the cabin broke something deeper in me, something I still haven't pieced back together. It was late October when I went back into the mountains, this time alone. I told myself it was to clear my head, maybe prove I wasn't spooked by what happened with Tyler. Truth is, I think the mountains had already hooked me. Once you've heard them whisper, it's hard to walk away. It's like they know your name now. The air had that brittle edge of winter coming. Leaves copper and gold littered the trail, crunching underfoot with every step. I hiked until dusk painted the horizon, and then decided to push a little farther, looking for a flat spot to camp. That's when I saw smoke curling between the trees. It rose in thin gray ribbons from somewhere down the slope. Not a forest fire, too controlled. Chimney. At first I felt relief. Maybe some hunter's cabin, maybe company for the night. Strange how quickly you'll convince yourself that strangers in the middle of nowhere are safer than solitude. The cabin sat in a hollow, crouched beneath the pines like it had grown there. Weathered boards, sagging porch, a roof patched with mismatched shingles. The windows were dark, but the smoke told me someone had been there not long ago. I hesitated at the tree line. Something about it didn't sit right. Still, I walked closer, calling out a friendly hello. My voice bounced back hollow in the cold air. The door was shut, but not locked. I pushed it open, and the smell hit me first. Wood smoke, damp earth, and something sour underneath. Inside, the cabin was one room. A stone fireplace smoldered with faint embers. A table stood in the corner with 2 chairs. Against the far wall, a narrow bed with a wool blanket rumpled like someone had just climbed out. But what froze me were the boots. A pair of them, caked in fresh mud, sitting neatly by the door. I spun, expecting someone behind me. The forest beyond the porch was still, too still. I called out again, louder this time. "Anyone here?" Silence. I told myself maybe the owner had stepped out to gather wood. Maybe I'd just missed them. But the hairs on my neck rose as if I'd just spoken too loud in a church. That's when I heard it. Scratching. At first faint, like mice in the walls. Then louder, clawing, dragging. It came from behind the bed, beneath the floorboards, inside the very bones of the cabin. My body locked up. I wanted to believe it was an animal. A raccoon, a stray dog. But the rhythm was wrong. It wasn't frantic like a trapped creature. It was deliberate, slow, as if something wanted me to know it was there. I backed toward the door, never taking my eyes off the bed. The scratching followed me, growing louder the closer I got to leaving. When I finally stepped outside, the sound stopped. Just like that, I bolted into the trees, heart hammering, branches whipping at my arms. I didn't stop until I reached the ridge, lungs burning, legs trembling. From up there, I looked back down into the hollow. Smoke still curled from the chimney, lazy and unbothered, as if mocking me. The next morning, I tried to find the cabin again. Retraced my steps, combed the hollow, marked every tree I thought I'd passed. But it was gone. No clearing, no foundation, no sign anything had ever been built there. Later that week, I mentioned it to a park ranger at a station near the trailhead. Tried to laugh it off, make it sound like a hiker's tall tale. But he didn't laugh. He just stared at me for a long moment before saying, "Son, if you saw a cabin out there, you didn't." I wanted to press him to ask what he meant, but the look in his eyes pinned me to silence. It wasn't disbelief. It was warning. And here's the part that still knots my stomach. Sometimes at night I dream about that cabin. I dream I'm standing on the porch looking in at the bed, the table, the boots by the door. Only now the bed isn't empty. There's someone lying beneath the blanket, and they're waiting for me to step inside. People talk about the beauty of the Appalachians, the untouched wilderness, the endless ridges rolling like ocean waves. They don't talk about the places that don't show up on maps, the places that vanish when you try to return, the places that don't want to be found until they find you. And that cabin, that wasn't the strangest thing people stumble across up here. Not by a long shot. If the cabin left me shaken, the trail nearly broke me. I can still hear it sometimes when I close my eyes. The screaming that wouldn't stop, that wrapped itself around the trees until I thought the whole mountain was alive and howling. It started on the third night of a solo hike. I'd planned a long route along one of the lesser-known spurs off the Appalachian Trail, a stretch people warned me was more trouble than it's worth, which of course only made me more determined. Pride again. I should have known better by then. The day had been normal enough. The air carried that sharp pine scent. The sun filtered through branches in gold patches, and I walked until my legs ached. By dusk, I'd set up camp on a ridge with a view that stretched for miles. I ate a cold dinner, tucked myself into my sleeping bag, and let exhaustion pull me under. Sometime past midnight, I woke to a sound that didn't belong. Not an animal, not the wind. Scream. It cut through the forest like a blade, high-pitched and ragged, echoing off the ridges. My first thought was that someone was hurt, a hiker, lost and injured. My second thought was that it didn't sound quite right. There was a distortion to it, like a recording played too loud through broken speakers. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the dark, calling out, "Hello? Do you need help?" The scream answered. Not words, not language, just raw, tearing noise, closer now. I froze. my beam shaking across the trees. The sound didn't fade like an echo should. It moved, weaving through the woods, circling me. Another scream joined it, deeper, guttural, vibrating in my chest like thunder. Then another, sharp and metallic, as if the trees themselves were screeching. I backed toward my tent, heart pounding. Every survival instinct screamed at me to stay put, to wait for daylight. But then I noticed something worse, the trail behind me. When I'd walked it earlier, it was straightforward, a single line cutting through the ridge. But now in the beam of my flashlight, it split into two, then three, then more, curling into the darkness like veins. I spun, certain I was imagining it, but every direction showed the same. Trails splitting, looping, folding back on themselves. The forest had rearranged itself while I slept. The screaming grew louder, pressing in from all sides. Human one moment, animal the next, then mechanical, grinding like gears stripped of oil. Chased me, hurting me, pushing me down whichever path I stumbled onto. I ran, branches clawing at my face, lungs burning. Every turn led me deeper, never closer to camp. The trails twisted until I no longer knew which way the ridge was, which way the valley fell. Screams followed, overlapping, blending into a chorus of agony that rattled my skull. At some point I realized they weren't just sounds. They were shaping the path itself. Each time I veered toward one, the trail bent, steering me where it wanted. The forest wasn't just alive, it was guiding me, trapping me. Hours or maybe minutes passed like that. Time didn't feel real anymore. My legs gave out and I collapsed against a tree, chest heaving. The screaming swelled around me, so loud I thought my eardrums would burst. Then just as suddenly as it began, silence. Utter, suffocating silence. I sat there, trembling, waiting for the next scream. Nothing came. Slowly, the trail straightened again, the forest stitching itself back together. When dawn light seeped through the canopy, I found myself standing on the original path. No splits, no loops, just the same trail I'd started on. I staggered back to my camp, too shaken to think. My tent sat untouched as if I'd never left it. For a moment, I wondered if I'd dreamed the whole thing, but I hadn't. You see, when I finally forced myself to leave that morning, I found something carved into a tree at the edge of camp. 3 long claw marks, deep and deliberate, gouged into the bark at chest height. They hadn't been there the night before. And when I traced the marks with my fingers, a sound carried faintly through the trees. Not a scream this time, a laugh. I packed up and left without looking back. I've told myself 1,000 times there's an explanation. Sound can do strange things in the mountains. Wind can twist echoes until they seem alive. Trails can play tricks on tired eyes. That's what I tell myself when I need to sleep. But the truth is, what I heard that night wasn't just sound. It was something older, something that lives in the bones of the mountains. And if you've ever walked the Appalachian Trail, you know that loop I described isn't possible. Not unless the mountain itself wants to keep you. That trail was bad enough. But then I met the thing that follows you. I was sitting in a greasy spoon diner just off a 2-lane road when the hunter told me about voices that aren't voices. He was the kind of man you notice even if you don't mean to. Tall, sun-cracked skin. A cap pulled low enough to shadow his eyes. He didn't look at me when he spoke. He just stirred his coffee and said, like it was nothing, "You ever hear your own name out here? Don't answer, and don't you dare follow." I thought he was trying to scare me, maybe playing into the mountain mystique for the benefit of a stranger. I laughed it off. He didn't. His hand trembled as he lifted the cup, the liquid rippling in the fluorescent light. "I heard my wife call me once," he said quietly. Sweet as anything, just like she always sounded. Only she was at home in town, 60 miles away. I turned toward it anyway. And I swear if my buddy hadn't grabbed my shoulder, I would have walked straight into the trees and never come back. I asked him what he thought it was. He just shook his head. "Not deer. Not coyotes, it's something else. They want you to trust them. Don't." Then he got up, left a tip, and walked out without another word. That was my first introduction to the imitator. I told myself I didn't believe him, but his story followed me like a splinter under the skin, sharp whenever I brushed against it. A week later, when I went back into the mountains, it was already waiting. It began small, almost harmless. I was hiking a ridgeline when I heard my mother's voice drifting up from the trees below. "Dinner's ready," she called, light and sing-song. Exactly the way she used to yell from the porch when I was a kid. For a second, my heart ached with homesickness. I almost smiled, but then the words twisted in my head. My mother was 3 states away. She hadn't called me in that tone for years. I froze at the edge of the trail, pulse drumming in my ears. The voice came again, closer this time. "Dinner's ready." Drawn out, stretched thin like gold tape. I bolted. The sound chased me for a while, fading and reappearing between the trees, until finally the mountain swallowed it whole. I told myself I'd imagined it, that fatigue had tricked me into hearing ghosts of my childhood. But deep down, I knew better. The second time, it was worse. I had stopped for the night near a shallow creek. The fire popped and cracked, throwing sparks into the dark. I was chewing jerky when I heard footsteps pacing just beyond the circle of light. I gripped my knife and called out, "Who's there?" My own voice answered, "Who's there?" It repeated, perfect down to the cadence, just a half-second too late. Every hair on my body lifted. I tried again, whispering now. "Hello? Hello?" came the reply, my whisper thrown back at me from the trees. I don't know how long it went on. Minutes, maybe hours. I'd speak, and it would follow, copying me with the faintest lag. Like an echo that knew it was supposed to be me but hadn't quite perfected the timing. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I doused the fire with dirt, packed what I could, and stumbled down the trail in the dark. I didn't stop until the horizon went gray with dawn. You'd think I'd have learned then that I'd never go back. But obsession is a funny thing. Once the mountains mark you, walking away feels impossible. It's like leaving a question unanswered, one that gnaws at you every waking moment. So I returned, and that's when I saw it. It was near dusk, the forest dipped in bruised purple light. I'd been hiking for hours, my mind dulled by the rhythm of footstep after footstep, when I glanced down the slope and froze. A figure stood among the trees, still as stone. At first I thought it was a trick of the light. But no, my stomach sank as I realized it looked exactly like me. Same jacket, same pack slung over one shoulder, same tilt of the head. I raised a hand, trembling. The figure raised its hand too. "Hey!" I shouted before I could stop myself. My voice echoed back from the figure, identical, delayed. "Hey!" The forest seemed to hold its breath. The figure smiled. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe I only imagined the curve of my own mouth twisting in the shadows. Then it called my name. My exact voice, warm and familiar, cutting through the dark. I stumbled back, nearly losing my footing on the rocks. I didn't wait for it to move. I turned and ran, crashing through brush, not caring which way the trail went. Branches lashed at my face, roots clawed at my boots, but I didn't stop until the world around me shifted from forest to the gravel edge of a road. When I finally looked back, nothing was there. Just trees and the fading light. I never saw the figure again. But sometimes when I lie awake at night, I hear my own voice outside my window, soft and patient, waiting for me to answer. I don't. And maybe that's why I'm still here to tell you this. I told myself I'd never go back, but I did. People always ask me why I keep going back. After everything, the whistling, the cabin, the screaming trail, the imitator, you'd think I'd have sworn off the Appalachians for good. Sometimes I ask myself the same question. Maybe I've got a death wish. Maybe I'm addicted to the terror, the adrenaline spike that comes with brushing against the unknown. Or maybe it's something else, because the more time I spend in those mountains, the more I'm convinced it's not just scattered stories. It's a pattern, and the pattern points to something bigger than superstition. Start with the numbers. Every year, people vanish in those hills. Hikers, campers, kids chasing fireflies. Some are found, bodies broken on the rocks or curled up in caves, starved and frozen. But plenty aren't. And the ones that do turn up, the details don't always add up. No footprints where there should have been. No sign of struggle. Sometimes their clothes folded neatly on a log, like they just stepped out of them and walked away. Then there are the restricted areas. You won't find them on tourist maps, but if you dig enough, or stumble across the wrong fence, you'll see them. Government land, no trespassing. Cameras mounted on poles that shouldn't exist in wilderness that remote. Locals mutter about strange lights above the ridges at night. Low hums that shake windows in their frames. And it's not just whispers. Every so often you'll meet someone who lets too much slip. Like the ranger who told me flat out, if you saw a cabin out there, you didn't? Or the woman in town who swore the trails near her property shifted every few years. Like the mountain was folding in on itself. There's a theory I've heard, never in print, only spoken in half whispers over beer or late-night campfires, that the Appalachians are older than we can comprehend, not just in years but in something deeper. They say the ridges are thresholds, seams in the world where reality thins and something else bleeds through. Sounds insane, right? But then you spend a night hearing your own voice call your name from the tree line, and suddenly, insane feels like the only explanation that makes sense. Some folks think it's government experiments. Others say it's ancient spirits older than language, wearing our faces to lure us into the dark. Me? I'm not sure it's one or the other. I think maybe the government's poking at something they barely understand. And whatever lives in the mountains has learned to use us as playthings in return. I don't expect you to take my word for it. Hell, I wouldn't if I were you. But if you've spent time in those woods, if you've heard the stories, really heard them, you know I'm not alone. So I'll ask you, have you seen the same things? Have you heard the same voices? Drop it in the comments. Share your stories. Maybe if enough of us put the pieces together, we'll figure out what the mountains are hiding. Or maybe we'll just prove what the locals already know. Some secrets aren't meant to be uncovered, and yet, I can't stop. I can't shake the feeling that the mountains have more to show me. That all the warnings, all the disappearances, all the whispers, they're leading somewhere, toward a story too big for one person to hold. There's one last night I haven't told you about. The one that still crawls through my dreams. The one I wish I could erase from memory, but I can't. So if you're still with me, lean closer. Because this last story, it's the one I'd give anything to forget. I told myself I wouldn't go back. After the voices, the cabin, the screams, I swore I'd had enough. But obsession eats at you. It doesn't scream, it whispers. And it whispered me right back into the Appalachians, into a valley the locals only ever mentioned with tight jaws and quick glances toward the ground. There were 4 of us that night. Me, a guy named Ben I'd met through a hiking forum, his cousin Shane, and a girl named Mariah who carried a camera like it was armor. We weren't friends, not really. Just strangers bound by a mutual hunger to see what we shouldn't. Maybe that was the first mistake. The valley wasn't marked on any official trail. It took us hours of bushwhacking, climbing over ridges slick with moss, sliding down slopes of shale that cut into our palms. By the time we found it, the sun was already low, bleeding orange into the horizon. It was beautiful at first glance, quiet, untouched, a green bowl cupped by mountains, a place you'd think about settling down in, building a cabin, raising a family. But the silence was wrong. No birds, no insects, not even the faint buzz of distant water. Just a stillness so thick it pressed into our ears. Mariah lifted her camera and whispered, "It feels staged, like it's waiting for us." Shane laughed, but it cracked in the middle, nervous. "Yeah, well, let's get our pictures and get out. No way I'm camping in this graveyard." We set up on a patch of flat ground near the tree line. Firewood was scarce, and the little flame we managed barely held back the dark. I remember staring at the ridges encircling us, how they seemed to lean inward, trapping us like insects in a jar. That's when time slipped. It began with small things. My watch said 9:15. Ben said 1:42. Mariah swore we'd been there half an hour. Shane argued it had been 5. None of us could agree on what we'd eaten for dinner, or if we'd eaten at all. Then the compass started spinning, slow at first, then faster, whirling so violently the needle blurred. Mariah muttered, "Electromagnetic interference," like naming it would make it less terrifying. But her voice shook. We decided to leave, pack up before the valley decided what to do with us. Only, the trail we came in on wasn't there anymore. Where the slope should have been was just more trees, endless and identical. Shane cursed, stomped into the brush, and we followed, clinging to the hope that moving was better than standing still. But the deeper we went, the more the valley folded in on itself. No matter which way we turned, we ended back at the same patch of ground, our fire still smoldering like a cruel landmark. That's when Ben vanished. 1 second he was walking ahead of us, flashlight bobbing on the path. The next he was gone. No scream, no crash of leaves, just absence. His light blinked out like someone pinched a candle flame. Mariah's camera clattered to the ground. She was shaking so hard she couldn't pick it back up. Jane shouted Ben's name until his voice cracked, but the valley only answered with silence. And then faintly, the sound came. A whistle. 3 low notes drifting through the trees. My stomach turned to ice. I knew that tune. Shane bolted toward it, screaming Ben's name, but I grabbed his arm and yanked him back. "That's not him," I whispered. My voice sounded foreign in my own ears. "That's not him." The whistle stopped. What replaced it was worse. A voice, warm and familiar. My voice calling my name. I wanted to collapse, to shut my eyes, plug my ears, vanish into the dirt. But Mariah's hand found mine, nails digging into my skin, grounding me. "Don't answer," she hissed. "Don't you dare answer." We huddled by the dying fire until the sky shifted gray. None of us slept. Every so often, footsteps circled us, slow and deliberate, but never close enough to see. And when the first fingers of sunlight crept over the ridges, the valley let us go. The trail was back, clear as day. We staggered out like survivors of a shipwreck. But something was wrong. When we finally reached the road, a pickup truck slowed beside us. The driver leaned out, chewing a toothpick, and asked where we'd come from. We told him the valley. He frowned. "You all look like you've been out here a week." We checked our phones. For me, it had been 1 night. For Mariah, 3 days. For Shane, 2. None of us could agree on what had really happened. Ben never came back. His name showed up on missing posters, then faded into rumors, then nothing at all. The world moved on. The valley kept him. I've tried to convince myself it was a shared hallucination, a trick of stress and fear, but sometimes, late at night, I catch myself staring at the ridges through my window, waiting for dawn, half expecting the compass on my desk to start spinning. And worse sometimes. In the quiet hours before sleep, I hear that whistle again. 3 low notes, patient, persistent, waiting for me to follow. I never do. Not yet. But I can't shake the feeling that the valley isn't finished with me. That it let me go on purpose. And maybe next time, I won't come back at all. You've heard the stories now, the whistles, the cabin, the trail, the voices that wear my face, and the valley that doesn't let everyone return. Maybe you think they're just that, stories. Campfire fuel. Creepypasta carved out of fear and imagination. I wish that's all they were. The truth is, I don't care if you believe me. The mountains don't care either. They don't wait for belief. They wait for footsteps. And when you step into their silence, when you let the ridges close around you, they decide what you'll hear. I've carried these stories like scars, hidden under sleeves, hoping time would fade them. But scars don't fade when the wound is still open. Every time I try to walk away, I hear something at night. A laugh outside my window, a whistle at the edge of a dream, the soft shuffle of boots that aren't mine. It's like the Appalachians marked me. And maybe telling you is the only way to share the weight. So here's my warning. If you ever find yourself deep in those hills, and you hear someone call your name, don't answer. If you see a cabin with smoke curling from the chimney, don't step inside. If a trail bends in ways it shouldn't, turn back before it closes around you. And if you hear something whistling in the pines, run. Because once the mountains know your name, they don't forget. I don't have all the answers. I don't know if it's government experiments or spirits older than language, or if the land itself is alive and hungry. But I do know this. I'm not the only one. That's where you come in. If you've heard the same stories, or worse, if you've lived them, share them. Drop them in the comments. Tell me, tell everyone. Because the more we talk, the more we might start to see the pattern. And if there's a way to survive these mountains, it'll come from putting the pieces together. I've read your messages. The ones where you tell me you've heard voices in your own woods, or you've walked trails that shouldn't exist. I know I'm not alone. That's why I keep talking, even when I swore I wouldn't. But I'll leave you with this. The mountains are patient. They don't care how far you run. They'll find you again when they're ready. And maybe, one night when you hear your name whispered through the trees, you'll think of me. You'll remember these words, and maybe you'll keep walking. Maybe you'll survive, but whatever you do, never ever answer.